I've got at least one trip. Oh, thank you, Nicola. Thank you. I've got at least one trip to Hawaii scheduled later on this year. And it looks like it might become like a two-part trip, maybe two separate trips, but it might be just, we're supposed to go on a family vacation. But then I think the following week, I've got a company that they just want me to stay and do some training. So I'm going to have to spend 2 weeks in Hawaii. It's going to be terrible. I feel horrible. It's just not going to be fun. I know. It's sad.
Jason, who are you doing the training for in Hawaii?
Private customer.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not an open training. It's for a customer.
So it's Aruba training?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, but it's for, like I said, it's for a specific company. So I don't want to expose that, I guess.
No.
Yeah. I was actually there last year doing some training too, for a different customer. But anyways, so we've been waiting to find out because right now there's a 2 week. If I fly to Hawaii today and land, I have to sit in a hotel for 2 weeks. But yeah, it's a 2 week self quarantine that they're mandating, and it's basically go straight to your hotel, and the hotel is responsible that if you can wander the hotel, of course, you're allowed to be on the hotel property, and then you just have to follow hotel rules. But as soon as you leave that hotel, if it's inside of that 2 week window, they're responsible to call the police. They pick you up, give you, I think it's a $5,000 fine, and send you straight to the airport and say go home.
Yes, they've also arrested people for violating that.
Yeah. So, but I just found out. I saw that ends on August 1st.
Yeah.
However, they're going to mandate a coronavirus test 3 days before you arrive.
I'm surprised they're ending it so soon, given the uptick in cases in the country.
Yeah. And where's you got to think it's one of those like, where is it happening? All of the big major cities. It's all of the big major cities. New York has obviously had their issue. LA is upticking. Chicago is upticking. So that's the 1, 2, 3, 4 is Houston. They're upticking. Phoenix is upticking. We're the sixth largest. I mean, it's just all of the big major population centers are upticking. Nelson, Friday evening. Tanya, did you get any sleep? Or are you still running ragged? Oh, still connected to audio. She might not hear me. Okay, they're not here. He'll be here later. And he hasn't really been here all week. Leonid, are you here? No. Okay. No worries, Seth. We'll probably be in lab right about then anyways. And I'm about to make a whole bunch of you hate me. This whole upcoming chapter is just nothing but math. And if you guys are anything like me, I don't like the math.
That's why we have computers. They do it for us.
Exactly. I'm right there with you.
Actually, I had to laugh that there was such a heavy chapter on the binary decimal conversion, because in my career, I can count on maybe one hand I've ever had to manually do that.
So the reason we spent time on that, one, because we want this to be, most of this class has nothing to do with HPE. Most of this class has nothing to do with Aruba. It's all just networking. We've never had this class. Right, and I feel like we needed this class for people that don't know anything, which is not most of you, and I admit that that's not most of you, but we still needed this class. But when we were talking about all that binary and showing all the ones and zeros, that's really it's going to come back in this chapter. And we're going to use those ones and zeros to create all of our maskings. And it's actually, it feels intuitive that way. If we hadn't have talked about the ones and zeros before, this chapter would just feel like a nightmare. But because we've already talked about that chapter, this chapter just feels like it makes complete sense.
Yeah, and I will say that I've been through multiple HPE and Aruba networking courses before, and this one is definitely the most comprehensive, layman's known experience.
So, some of my buddies, like Ricardo, who wrote this lab, right? He didn't write the slides, but he wrote the lab. I've had some really in-depth conversations with him about all of this, and the fact that, prior to this class solves the issues. We used to have to send people to another company, say, go learn networking for them, and then come back. That's not smart. That's not wise. That makes no sense. So I've been begging for this class to be developed for years. So I remember when they were going through, the outlining process and all of that, they showed it all. They kept, Ricardo, hey, Jason, what do you think of this? I'm like, thank you. And this whole class, now that I've been teaching through it, right? This is my first teach through this course, because it's going to be everybody's first teach through this course coming up. I'm still finding little things, and I keep dropping all of these notes back to Ricardo saying, hey, we need to add this, we need to add this, we need to add this, just for clarity's purposes, not because it makes it a harder class, but just because it clarifies all of the stuff that we're talking about.
Oh, you guys have done a good job. My past experiences have been less than stellar, especially on the HPE side. A lot of their training courses in the past have been not great, to be polite. So.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm not a legacy HPE instructor, so you're certainly not going to offend me when you say that. I definitely exist on the Aruba side of the house.
Well, yeah, you guys are definitely doing better than the old HPE folks, that's for sure.
Yeah. So, hey, Livio, well, I'm just stalling for a couple of minutes here. You asked me a lot of, and I'm not picking on you when I say this. You asked me a lot of what's the difference between old and now. You've been asking me a lot of those questions. Well, what's the difference? How's it been changing? Do you think it would be beneficial for us to add a few slides that do that?
Yeah, definitely. Maybe with the converter and some of that stuff.
Okay. Because we have some slides in our mobility courses with the controllers. When we were going from version 6 to version 8, we actually had some comparison slides. Okay, it was this, it's now this.
Because after all, the commerce stuff hasn't been completely about the site. It's just in the high-end data center with the high mobility stuff. So it's still kind of part of the HP.
See, it might make sense to put that in the data center networking course, though.
But I think a lot of, basically where I come from is that there was a point where HP said, now we're going with the Commerce 7, invest into it. This is the future. And so, of course, we did, and a couple of years later, they kind of changed their mind and went with Ubers again.
Yeah.
And so that's basically why the network is like half is Commerce 7 and half is your Ubers stuff.
Sure.
Can I just throw in on that a little bit too? I think from my point of view, CX is really cool. I think the checkpointing stuff has been just life changing. We're using IMC to do all of that right now, and it works. But it's it's a whole extra system to manage all that, the configuration, all the backups, and restoration. But on the other hand, at the end of this, I'm gonna have to go back and retranslate all the CX stuff back to my OSS so that I can do my day to day. So I think a little bit of touch on it might be nice. From what I've noticed, it's exceptionally similar. I think there's just a couple of things that won't exist in the old stuff, right?
Like switching is switching, right?
And I do love the trunk to lag thing. That has cleared up so many problems. Somebody with no real experience. Every time you search for a trunk and it's not what you think it is, it's been a nightmare.
Yep. So, all right, cool. That's valuable. And feel free, by the way, on the surveys, feel free to put that note in there. Great class. Would be cool to see this, stuff, because I promise they read the surveys, right? I can pass that message along, and I will pass that message along to Ricardo because I know he's involved in helping keep, doing that. We've been chatting all week about all sorts of stuff because he's actually working on something else that I'm involved with. So we've been doing all sorts of stuff this week. So I will certainly pass those messages along as far as all of that goes. Okay.
Hey, Jason?
Yeah.
Just to clear up, are you going to send everybody the links for the labs for doing the labs later? Or just
I will not do that. I will not be doing that. You'll be getting a link from the HPE team for that.
Great. Okay.
Yeah. So you will get a message. Every day they're asking me to take attendance and send it back to them. And so every day I'm taking attendance and sending it back to them. Okay. So they know.
And you know how this link works. It's a peer that you can access the lab infrastructure to use. You can use whatever you want. You have an idea how does that work?
I think what it is it's a reservation. You'll have to go in and schedule a time.
Okay.
Or a series, and you'll get like so much. You're reserving a block of time. And okay. I don't know how many days it is. It's probably 3 or 4 days. The goal is not, here's a bunch of equipment for 6 months. It's, it's a chunk of time, but it's certainly enough time to get through the materials.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Reason I am asking that is because I certainly I screwed something in my lab exercise, and I'm having troubles getting along with the new tasks. Something's not working as it should.
What lab are you in?
Well, I gave up yesterday, but it was
the issue with after you configured VRRP?
No, just way before that. So
okay.
No worries about that. I know I did something wrong.
Gotcha. Well, remember, you can always roll back. You can do the checkpoint rollback.
Yeah.
And then just restart.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking that because I will probably do this after we finish this class, and I'm gonna
sure
redo it from the scratch.
Sure. No, fair enough.
Okay.
Yeah. So you will get an email from the HPE team. The lab interface will probably look a whole lot like what you've been seeing here, and we go from there.
Okay. Yeah, I would guess it will.
I got you, Luis. Don't worry, I see you.
I would guess it will be like the similar as all the self-directed courses in the HP learning. You get a voucher for like 4 days of lab, and you can just take your own time. And if you register, you have like 4 days to do the labs.
Yeah, I believe that's exactly what this will be. Yes. Yeah.
And if you have some minutes more, just another question regarding the certification. I understand that there's a new certification test for this version of the the course. That right? But the old one is still going on and it's still valid?
The old one, I believe, is still there through the end of the fiscal year. So I think it's still there through October.
Oh, okay, great.
That's what I saw on the website the other day, that it was October.
Okay.
Yep. Kai, I don't know that there's a difference other than checkpoint rollback is a whole lot easier.
And I did the mobility certification a couple of months ago, and this one is totally theoretical, or there is something practical in this first level. You have something to configure, or it's just a test, multiple choices?
Yeah. The associate and professional level are just Pearson VUE, multiple choice, true, false. There's no simulator.
Okay, great.
Yeah, it's not like the evil Cisco tests. I hated those simulators.
I've never done that, but okay.
Everybody, right? The only time we hand you gear is the only time we hand you gear is the expert level practical exam. So there's an associate level exam, that's just Pearson VUE, multiple choice. There's a professional level exam, Pearson VUE, multiple choice. There's an expert level, quote unquote, written exam. It's just another Pearson VUE, multiple choice. If you pass all 3 of those, then you can sit the practical.
Okay.
And that's, of course, where you go on site. You've got the 8 hours. Nobody passes it the first time. It's that exam. I don't want to say nobody passes it. People pass it the first time. But it's always a challenge. Okay. Luis, the old one and this one give you the same. Yeah, it's ACSA. Period. So is what it is. Right? That's the same thing, right? I mean, if you have your CCIE, it's not a CCIE at a specific version. You have your CCIE, right? So you have your ACSA, you have your ACSA. I don't think that they're drawing a distinction between them. Okay. All right. Let's get into it. We've stalled long enough. I know Francesco will be here later. Mike Mendoza. Let me just see. No Mike here. Keith hasn't been here all week. Leonid. Oh, you're here. Excellent. Let's move on. All right, so you can see the chapter. Most of this chapter is based in classful subnetting. We will talk some about variable length subnet masking, and we will very, like, one slide talk about CIDR. Okay, so traditional IPv4 addresses are broken into 5 classes. The first 3 classes are used to assign addresses for unicast purposes, assign addresses out. Class D is for multicast. You'll actually see some more of that as we move through the class. You'll see some of those multicast addresses. And then Class E is currently reserved, right? It's not something that's assignable to the public world, so to speak. So a Class A network looks something like this. The network mask is contained on the first octet. The remaining 3 octets, the remaining 24 bits, are all used for host addresses. With Class B, the first 2 octets are the network. With Class C, the first 3 octets are reserved for the network. Okay, so inside of that, that would mean that a Class A network with 8 network bits and 24 host bits would give you 16.77 million host addresses. A Class B network with the 16 host bits with 65,000 host addresses. Class C, 8 host bits, 254 host addresses. Okay. Now, how do we get these IP addresses? Well, there's public range and there's private range. Okay. We already showed you the entire Class A, the entire Class B, the entire Class C, right? Everything in that first octet, Class A. First 2 octets, Class B. First 3 octets, Class C. But within that, they have reserved 3 specific ranges, 3 scopes. And that's what we're seeing down here. For private addressing. Private addresses are not routable within the public world, right? They are reserved for your company. They are used for private purposes. And this, quite frankly, right here is what has made IPv4 last. It has stretched IPv4 well beyond its time. Because now everybody's house is 192.168. something, and then it maps to a singular IP address that goes back to your ISP. Okay? So within your house, you can use any of those ranges down here, and your router will translate that to your public IP address and translate all of those addresses to your public IP address. So the disadvantage of using a pure classful network is, well, pretty darn obvious, right? Who needs 16.7 million addresses inside their company? In one network, right? This is ridiculous, right? I'm going to create one network for everything and just have really strong firewalls everywhere. No, that's crazy. Okay, so because of this, classful networks, they're just not really used. Okay, but we're going to use the concept of the classful network to explain subnetting, chopping up the classful network into smaller usable chunks. Okay, so here, the circle, the entire pie here represents one Class C network. But we are dividing it into 4 equal subnets, each with 62 host addresses. Right? This starts making our networks more functional, more usable, shrinking the broadcast domain, making everything more functional. Okay, so this is why we went into the binary before. Your Class A network, right, has 8 network bits and 24, notice the dots here, we didn't actually put in all 24, 24 host bits. Okay? So what I can do is I can borrow some of those host bits. I don't need 16.7 million addresses in my network. I would like to create more networks with less addresses. So what I can do is I can borrow some of those host bits. So in this case, I've borrowed the first 5. To create additional networks. Right, and that's what we're going to be talking about here. So here's an example of a Class B network. The classful network 172.16.0.0 with the subnet mask of 255.255, right? That's classful. Right, the first 2 octets are covered. Everything else remaining is host bits, 65,000 addresses possible. Right, but if I borrow, say, 8 of those host bits, I've borrowed all of them, so I've put a 255 there. That gives me a whole bunch of additional networks that I can now configure. So now I have 172.16.1.2.3.4, and all of these networks have 254 hosts on them. So this is how we can chop up and divide. Somebody hands you a Class B network, you can still divide that further and make it work better for your purposes. Okay, and then here's just a Class C example where they have borrowed, the Class C, I've got 255, 255, 255. I have 8 remaining host bits. I've borrowed 4 of them to create an additional 16 subnets out of this single network here. Okay, and so that's what they're showing here. Okay, here's an IP address. This is a Class C IP address. So I know I've got those first 24 ones. In reality, I've got 3 more due to the 224. So I have borrowed 3 host bits to create some additional networks. So here's where the math starts kicking in. And quite frankly, in many ways, this is where it actually starts making sense. Okay? The number of subnets, 2 to the S, right? So we have 2 to the S, right? We're powering, okay? Where S represents the number of bits borrowed. Or we could say the number of hosts per subnet, 2 to the H minus 2. We have to minus 2 because the first address in the network is reserved as the network address, and the last one is the broadcast address that would go to everybody in the network. Okay, so we have 2 to the H would give us the total number of addresses minus 2 to get us to our hosts. So H is the number of binary bits used in the host portion. Okay, so here we have an example of this Class B network. So we know the first 16 bits belong to the Class B portion of this conversation. The 224 is actually 19 bits, which means we have borrowed 3. So 2 to the 3, 2 to the third power is 8, so I have 8 subnets. Going the other direction, how many hosts do I have? Well, there's 32 possible bits. 19 were for the network and the subnet. So I have 13 remaining. 2 to the H, which would be 2 to the 13 minus 2, 8,190 hosts within each of those 8 networks. Let's continue this. The example here is 172.16.53.201/20. All right, so /20, I'm masking 20. So I write down the address, I write down the mask. I know my ones and zeros, what you find the octet where the ones and zeros are. If it's all ones, we don't care. If it's all zeros, we don't care. Find the octet where ones and zeros exist together. And that would be the third octet. So we know the network ID will start with 172.16 on this side. Okay? But we're trying to find the network ID. What network is this address a part of? Okay, so to do this, we do 2 to the Z. Aren't you glad you have the slides? Right, so you don't actually have to memorize this at the exact second. Where Z is the number of zeros in the working octet. So in this case, there are 4 zeros in the working octet. So 2 to the 4 is equal to 16. So then you just start multiplying by 16. And because we would like to know what network this is inside of, we want to get as close to 53 without going past 53. So 16, 32, 48. The next number would be 64. Oh, too far. Back up 1. 48 is the answer. So I put my 48 in the column. That's the network ID for this network. The first address would be .1. The broadcast address would be the next network minus 1. So the next network, right, 48 plus 16 would have been 64.0. So I just back up 1. 63.255. That's the broadcast address, which means the last usable host address would be the 254. Right. Route to the network, send broadcasts to everybody in the network using that address. Reach anybody individually using their unicast address.
Jason?
Yeah.
Can you go back in explanation just to show how you converted the /20 to the subnet mask over there?
Meaning how the 20 became the 240?
Yeah.
21s with zeros on the end in binary is 240.
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
Yep. All right, so when you see this is the number of ones. Listing available subnets. Listing the available subnets. So instead of 2 to the Z, which is what we showed back here, I remember if I go back here, we talked about right here, 2 to the Z. To do this analysis here, to list the available subnets, instead of doing 2 to the Z where we're looking for the zeros, they're looking for the number of ones in this case. Now, /240, the /20 here, or no, sorry, I shouldn't say /240, /20 or 255, 255, 240, 0. Right? In this case, the ones are, it's 4 ones and 4 zeros, so it's the same. Right? So it's 16. At that point, you just start moving through your networks. The first network would be 172.16.0.0. The next one, 172.16.16.0. Then 32.0. Then 48.0. Then 64.0. And you keep going until you run out of choices. Once I get to 240, the next number would be 256, which is we can't go past 255. So we're now out of networks. So this will divide this /20 would divide this class B into 16 separate networks. How can we determine the best mask? Okay, this is the one that usually winds up annoying people because there's not a right answer. Right? There's a best practice, but there's a lot of philosophy that we're just not going to do it. Let's not get into personal philosophy here. Okay? So corporate, this XYZ Corp has a 172.20.00 network. That's their Class B network. They require 50 subnets with 40 hosts on each subnet. So how can we do that? I mean, how can we create the network mask that would create that for us out of the 172.20? Well, we need to find the number of subnets. So we've already talked about how do we find the number of subnets, 2 to the S, where S represents the number of borrowed bits from the hosts, right? I've got 16 bits. So how many of those am I going to borrow to get my 50 subnets? So I have to go 2 to the 1. Okay, that's 2. 2 to the 2 is 4. 2 to the 3. And I get to 2 to the 6. 2 to the 6 gives me 64 hosts. 2 to the 5 gives me 32 hosts. Well, I need, not hosts, subnets. Well, I need at least 50 subnets. So I can't do 2 to the 5 is not going to work. It doesn't give me enough. So I have to use 2 to the 6. So I will borrow, or I can borrow 6 of the host bits to create my 50 networks. Okay. I also need 40 hosts on each subnet. Well, that's 2 to the H minus 2. We've showed you that. This is where all of this actually starts making sense. And I run the same math and I go, I know I need at least 40 hosts. Well, we know 2 to the 5 is 32, so that's not going to work. 2 to the 6 is 64. Minus 2 for the network ID and broadcast address. Ooh, I have 62 available host address. I need at least 40. That's my best choice. So I need 6 zeros on the end to meet this. And so when we look at this with all of the ones and zeros on the screen, this portion is my classful portion. These are the 6 zeros that I must borrow in order to get the number of subnets. These are the 6 zeros that I must borrow in order to get the number of hosts I need. That means there's 4 floaters. In reality, there is not one right answer. I completely agree with you, Louis, but that's philosophy. Okay? Typically speaking, besides 24 is the easiest, and I totally agree with you. I think everybody would agree with you in this case. The best practice is to limit the broadcast domain, right? So they would say to use the longest mask possible. Okay. But any of those answers solve the needs of the company. At that point, you go back to the company and go, what do you want to do? And then make your huge point for the /24, because damn, it's a whole lot easier. Right? I think that's what everybody would probably want to do. Right? But if we're just going based on best practice, limit the broadcast domain, keep everything as small as possible, well, then the longest mask possible wins. The /26 wins. Okay? But this is why we showed you all those ones and zeros back on Monday. This slide makes a lot more sense now. Okay, so what statements are true about classful, which is what we've been talking about, right? Class A, Class B, Class C networks, classful IP addressing. Okay. The reason why C is not available is this is a private address. ISPs work in public space. Okay. B can't be an answer because there's 256 total numbers possible in a Class C, but the first one is reserved for the network and the last one is reserved for the broadcast address, leaving 254 host addresses. Two to the H minus 2. You are using a /24 subnet mask with a Class B address of 172.20. All right, so the Class B has the network mask of 255.255.00, but we are using a subnet mask to borrow additional bits. What's true? Yep, B and D. Okay, so let's break everything we just talked about, because what we've been talking about so far is equal-sized networks, right? It's a fixed length. We're chopping up an existing classful network into equal-sized subnetworks. All right, that's this concept on the right. That's everything we were just talking about. Okay, but it can waste address space. You know, for example, what if you have this network here between these two devices, these two routing devices? I need two, you know, in theory, I only need two host IP addresses, plus the broadcast, plus the network. I only need 4 total IP addresses for this space. And I handed a /24, I've just wasted a ton of addresses. Okay, so what we can do is we can use variable length. Basically, we can chop up our classful network into different sized subnetworks. It kind of makes sense, quite frankly. Okay, so what you got to look at is your requirements. Right, sales department has 74 endpoints. Okay, there wouldn't be any room, Jay, but if it's a point-to-point link between two devices, you don't need to worry about the room either. Ah, Francesco's here. I assume that's you. Saw an FD pop in. Okay, so you look at the requirements of each network. You map those requirements. So those are the host IDs. Remember, you have to add 2. Right, for the subnet and the broadcast. And then you find the most appropriate size for your network. Right? So yes, sales is going to get some extra IP. Nothing we can do about it. It is what it is. All right, and this link 1, link 2, link 3, if I back up here, we're talking about like these types of links. You can see here, interswitch links, 2 IP addresses at each end. Right, we're just talking about connecting these links here. So you start with the big one. right? You just do everything as normal. And you figure out, okay, you need your 128. So you're chopping that total network now into 2 individual networks. And that gives you your range. And of course, the first set of IP, that first range, that's reserved for the sales department. And that's their range, that's their network ID, that's their broadcast. Okay, but then I got to go to the production subnet. Right, we needed 62 here. So in reality, what happens is we chop it, functionally speaking, it will chop everything, the entire network, into 4 subnets. The first 2 of that /26 are already consumed by sales, so you can't use those. Right, so you always have to keep your, don't have your problem there. Okay, so we're going to use the 3rd subnet for this department. And then this group needs a /27, which in functionality to that network and to those requirements chops that 192, 168 into 8 pieces. But this group here is going to get the 7th piece of it because the first 6 are already consumed by sales and production. Right, so you start big and then work your way down. Then link 1 is going to use a /30, which actually divides this network into 64 pieces. Link 1 is going to get piece 57 because all of the other pieces with this mask are consumed with the other networks. And then likewise going to the other ones, if it's all the same, then you just 57, 58, 59. Okay, now, CIDR, classless interdomain routing introduction. This is very generic. We're literally doing this to put the term in your head. We're not getting into this here. Okay, other than this slide and the next slide, just as a conceptual idea, and then move on with life. Okay? It's a method of allocating IP addresses and of IP routing, right? I mean, that's what we've been talking about this whole time. It replaces the classful architecture, and it allows us to group subnets into a single entry within the routing table. This is referred to as supernetting. Right? So the example here is Core 2 knows about all of these networks. How can we notify Core 1 about all of this? And what we're saying is we can create a single entry for all of that. How did we do that? Let's look at the 1s and 0s here. So there's all of your 1s and 0s for each of those networks. What's in common? Well, what is in common on all of those is the first 19 bits. Yes. Yes, Raul. Okay. And so we can say to reach Core 2 is telling Core 1, if you want to reach 10.1.0.0/19, anything in that, just send it to me. Now I don't have to have individual routes for everything, expanding the route tables as we go. And 1 entry handles all 6 of those subnets. And that's about as much as, that's it, okay? So now it's lab time. The lab is paper. It's not actually in the lab, right? We're not doing this on the machines. This is going to be paper and pencil. Okay, so in the lab guide, let me show that to you real quick. Here's the lab. Yes, I am sharing that with you. Here's the lab guide. So let's go to subnetting and variable length subnet masking, which means all of you could do this, right? Yeah, every one of you can do this, right? You're going through and you're going to do what we were just showing you on the screen. So, if you have to re-pull up your slides to remember, pull up your slides and remember, as you go through this. Down here, Appendix 2 is your answers. I was very strong that they needed to include all of these answers for this. Okay, so we're doing lab 9 right now. The recommendation is that this is going to take a while, right? So just, as a moment of breath, right? They're saying this could take an hour. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll say it's almost 9 o'clock, and assuming that we're going to need a coffee break and assuming that we're going to need a bio break and all of that, let's just say it's almost 9 o'clock, so I will teach the next chapter at 10. Okay, if you choose to do this, great, more power to you. If you don't, I'm teaching the next chapter at 10.
Can I ask kind of I guess it might be a philosophical question.
Sure, and there's lots of people in here that I'm sure would love to share some philosophy.
I suspected. So in the subnetting, we went with like the smallest possible size for each of the areas that we were trying to design.
Yes.
Is that a good idea? Like I'm thinking like sales, like I would absolutely want to have like more if so you would hope that your company would get bigger and need more sales, right?
Yeah, so you have to factor growth into that number before you calculate it.
Okay.
I think that is a philosophically strong statement to make. If you know that if you're going through a subnet redesign right now, okay, about 1 hour, yes, Francesco, about 1 hour. If you know you're going to have growth in the next year or two, I would factor that in. Absolutely. I mean, you should factor that into your entire purchase, the number of, everything that you're buying.
Right.
And then, use your numbers based off of that. Actually, the interesting part is in that example, the sales department needed 74 addresses, 76 addresses, but they were going to be getting 126 host addresses.
Exactly.
So they already were going to have extra.
Cool.
But the recommendation for smaller is from a networking perspective of small broadcast domain.
Gotcha.
Always take into account the real life, like how many do I actually need, and be responsible about that number. Don't tell me you need 16,000 addresses because you don't. Sure, Livio. I mean, in an Aruba wireless network, if you've designed your network properly, we've said that you can do single subnet design for your, like your employees and all of that. So it depends on one philosophy. Who's a native switching person is probably going to go as small as possible. A wireless person is going to say, screw that, let's make it easy. Let's go as big as possible. And somebody the manager somewhere in the middle has to be responsible and let them fight that out, But, if we're talking about traditional networking, smaller broadcast size is better. Aruba's technology is definitely rewriting that story. Right? But every vendor is going to be different in how they run the packets and where they move things through the network. That's where you got to know your devices.
Yeah, I think it's traditionally been related to the processing power of the switches.
Yep. I think that's a big part of it as well.
That's grown so much these days, so it's not a problem anymore.
Yeah. In the wireless side, it was also to limit the broadcast. I mean, that was why we often recommended /24s. But the Aruba controllers now are so good at limiting the broadcast and converting broadcast to unicast and doing all of those things that it's not as important anymore, right? It's a huge issue in the air. Broadcast is a huge issue in the air. But if we have a way to get rid of that, well, then who cares? As long as you have the proper optimizations turned on, Luis, that's the kicker. Right? In our expert level mobility course, we get into all of those optimizations. Especially when it comes to voice and multicast and all of those things, because that's where everything explodes. Cool. All right. Be right back. Coffee refresh.
Hola, soy Nuria Pereda, responsable comercial del segmento de pequeña y mediana empresa en Hewlett Packard Enterprise. Como sabrás, en estos días estamos celebrando nuestro evento mundial Discover Virtual Experience y no quería perder la oportunidad de presentarte el contenido específico que tenemos en torno al negocio de la pequeña y mediana empresa. Después de la crisis sanitaria producida por el COVID-19, en estos momentos la continuidad del negocio de las pymes es de vital importancia. Muchas de ellas han sufrido especialmente al no estar preparadas con la infraestructura de TI adecuada para mantener sus operaciones comerciales en activo a medida que el teletrabajo y la seguridad se han vuelto las áreas más críticas. Por ello, desde HP queremos que sepas que estamos aquí para ayudarte. Hemos preparado unas sesiones exclusivas para ti, donde expertos de la industria y de HP hablarán sobre cómo las pymes pueden recuperar la sostenibilidad financiera, monetizar un negocio digital e innovar con las nuevas tecnologías. Como ves, tendremos una sesión en directo el día 30 de junio a las 5 de la tarde, donde diferentes expertos de HP y un analista de Aberdeen nos contarán cómo las pymes pueden recuperarse en estos momentos y prepararse para salir con más fuerza en este futuro inmediato. También te presentaremos una serie de sesiones bajo demanda sobre diferentes temáticas que podrás ver y escuchar cuando mejor te venga. Y por último, para los perfiles más técnicos de tu organización, también podrás encontrar un catálogo con las mejores demostraciones de producto y soluciones. Acompáñanos en nuestro evento mundial a partir del 30 de junio. Si no lo has hecho ya, regístrate.
Hola, mi nombre es Fatima Laura, soy estudiante de CCNA Rotterdam City y de Estudio Roberto Jamar. Voy a explicaros el tema de VSM. Voy a empezar por lo que es, después diré sus ventajas, para que utiliza y explicaré un ejemplo. Muy bien. VSM significa máscara de software de longitud variable. Permite dividir un espacio de red en partes desiguales, es decir, la máscara de subred de dirección IP variará según la cantidad de bits que se tomen prestados para una subred específica. Se conoce también como división de subredes en subredes porque una subred se puede dividir en varias otras y una de esas en otras varias y así sucesivamente hasta que no se caso que no pueden poner más equipos. Muy bien, pues la utilización. VLSM surge como la solución para evitar el agotamiento de dirección IP en 1937, también para reducir el tráfico general de la red y mejorar el rendimiento de esta, y así conservar el espacio de direcciones. Esto también da las ventajas de evitar la duplicación de direcciones IP, de controlar la seguridad del rendimiento, proporcionar y controlar el acceso, eso también es muy importante. Muy bien, pues cosas que tenemos que tener en cuenta antes de empezar a hacer un ejercicio de VSM. Pues son dos factores muy importantes. Si nos piden subredes, sabemos que tenemos que utilizar esta fórmula para poder calcularlo, donde n es la cantidad de bits que se tomarán prestados. Siempre se tomarán de izquierda a derecha las subredes, ¿vale? Y tenemos también otras que nos piden el host, pues la dirección del host requerida utilizaremos esta fórmula de aquí. Dos elevado a n menos 2, donde n será las subredes, ¿vale? Nos piden subredes, eso es también muy importante. Muy bien, pues cosas que tenemos que tener en cuenta antes de empezar a hacer un ejercicio de VSM. Pues son dos factores muy importantes. Si nos piden subredes, sabemos que tenemos que utilizar esta fórmula para poder calcularlo, donde n es la cantidad de bits que se tomarán prestados. Siempre se tomarán de izquierda a derecha las subredes, ¿vale? Y tenemos también otras que nos piden el host, pues la dirección de host requerida utilizaremos esta forma de aquí, 2 elevado a n menos 2, donde n será la cantidad de bits de host restantes. Eso lo cogemos de derecha a izquierda, eso es muy importante. Vale, pues el ejercicio que os propongo nos pide el siguiente: dividir la siguiente dirección IP, esta dirección IP de clase C, en 4 subredes, y la cuarta subred de esta, otra vez Y la tercera de esta es el direccionamiento completo. Muy bien, vamos por partes. Esta dirección IP es de clase G/24, que esto lo lleva la máscara por defecto, es la máscara de su clase. Por lo que para sacar el VLSM la establecemos de su equivalente en binario, poniendo los 24 bits activos, que es esto de aquí. Son 8 unos, 8 más 8, 16 más 8, 24. Entonces son 255, 255, 255.0. Vale, pues seguimos. El primer paso. Dividir en 4 subredes la dirección IP que nos han dado. En otros subredes utilizaremos nuestra fórmula 2 elevado a n, en este caso será 2 elevado a 2 igual a 4. 4 subredes, que es lo que nos pide. Muy bien. Este 2 son los números de bits que tengo que coger de izquierda a derecha. Pues yo cojo los bits y estos serán los hosts que tengo. Vale. Pues empecemos por la máscara de subred, que como esto estaba todo a 0, pero como tengo que poner 2 bits, pues pongo 1, 1. Y entonces, si aquí tenía 24, 25 y 26. Entonces 26 será /26. Muy bien, ahora en la dirección IP que nos han dado, cojo estos 2 bits y saco las 4 subredes que me piden, que es justo 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1. Y estas son las direcciones IP que me salen. Punto 0, punto 64, punto 128 y punto 122/26, porque aquí tenemos la máscara de subred. Perfecto. Ahora nos piden que esta dirección de aquí, la última, la dividamos en otras 4. Pues muy bien, vamos a ver. La última subred la dividimos en 4 subredes más. Muy bien, nos piden 4 subredes más de la dirección IP, de esta de aquí. Entonces, pues, nos utilizaremos nuestra fórmula 2 elevado a n, que en este caso es de 2, que es igual a 4. 4 subredes que nos están pidiendo. Entonces pongo este de aquí, 2 bits. Lo que hemos puesto antes lo dejamos tal cual. Seguimos en los siguientes espacios que tenemos siempre de izquierda a derecha al tratarse de subredes. Muy bien, pues cogemos 2 más. Entonces si teníamos 26, 26, 27, 28, /28. Y este número de aquí de la máscara de subred, en decimal será 240. Perfecto. Pues vamos a coger la dirección. Las direcciones de subred, cogemos 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1. Perfecto, pues sumamos. 128 más 64 son 192. Y 192 más 16 son 108. Y 192 más 32 son 224. Y 192 más 32 más 16 son 240. /28, por lo que aquí os he explicado la máscara de subred. Ahora nos pide que esta tercera subred le demos el direccionamiento completo. Pues muy bien. Con el direccionamiento completo nos están pidiendo la dirección de red, la dirección de broadcast, la primera dirección de red y la última. Pues la dirección de red va a ser la misma que el game, ¿vale? Exactamente la misma. La dirección de broadcast simplemente es poner todo esto que nos ha sobrado, todo lo que nos ha sobrado, el resto lo dejamos igual. Esto de aquí a unos. Si ponemos todo esto a unos, sería 1, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 1. Esto nos daría 239 en decimal. Pues ponemos 239/28, que eso no cambia,